Having the time of my life with your inheritance. Wish you were here. That's the message I sent my daughter and her husband from the deck of a luxury coastal cruise ship, along with a photo of me parasailing off the coast of Martha's Vineyard. 3 weeks earlier, my son-in-law had told me I was too old to join their family vacation. What he didn't know was that the beach house they were staying in had been purchased with just a fraction of what my late husband left me. Money that was still technically mine to manage until I decided otherwise. As I sipped my champagne watching the Atlantic sunset, I finally felt alive again. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I traced my finger along the mahogany picture frame for the third time that morning, wiping away dust that wasn't there. Thomas's smile beamed back at me, frozen in time on our 40th anniversary, 4 years before cancer took him away. The silence in our 2-story colonial pressed against my ears like cotton wool. Another quiet day. Just you and me, I murmured to the photograph. My name is Margaret Harrington. At 67, I'd spent 35 years building a successful real estate agency before selling it to my junior partners 3 years ago. Now, I was just a widow, a mother to 1 daughter and grandmother to 2 children, who lived 2 hours away in Boston, and whose faces I struggled to remember clearly between our increasingly rare visits. Outside, early summer had transformed my garden into a masterpiece of colors. After Thomas died, I'd channeled my grief into the soil, expanding his beloved vegetable gardens and adding new flower varieties each season. The neighbors often commented on my impressive energy as I spent hours kneeling in the dirt, as if expecting someone my age to be confined to a rocking chair. The antique grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 10. I moved toward the kitchen to prepare my morning tea, the same English breakfast blend Thomas and I had shared every morning for decades. The kettle whistled as I glanced at the calendar hanging beside the refrigerator. Tuesday's square was circled in blue, my Pilates class at the community center. Thursday had my book club meeting. Saturday was blank, as was Sunday, and every day the following week. The phone's shrill ring interrupted my routine. I lunged for it, nearly spilling my tea. "Mom." Catherine's voice carried that slightly distracted tone I'd grown accustomed to, the sound of someone calling out of obligation rather than desire. Catherine, what a wonderful surprise. I tried to mask the eagerness in my voice, the raw hunger for connection. How are Ben and Hannah? Is Ben still playing baseball? And how's David's new position going? Everyone's fine, Mom. Listen, I'm actually calling about something specific. My heart quickened. Perhaps they needed me to watch the children for a weekend. I'd been suggesting it for months. David and I are planning a big family vacation this summer. Remember that beach house on Cape Cod that you and Dad used to rent when I was a kid? We managed to book it for 3 weeks in July. The kids are so excited. The memories flooded back instantly. Catherine building sandcastles with Thomas, the little seafood shack where we'd eat lobster rolls, evening walks along the shore collecting shells. That's wonderful. I've been saving up for something special. When should I plan to arrive? I could come a day early and stock the kitchen for everyone. The silence that followed stretched just a beat too long. Well, that's the thing, Mom. We're bringing David's parents and his brother Eric and Eric's new girlfriend. The kids have this whole adventure itinerary planned. Kayaking, hiking the dunes, maybe even surfing lessons. There are 3 flights of stairs in the house, and it's a half-mile walk to the beach. I waited, not comprehending his point. David and I thought it might be challenging for someone your age. We're worried you might feel left out or hold the group back. The words hit like ice water. Catherine, I'm only 67. I do Pilates 3 times a week. I garden for hours every day in the summer heat. Last month, I helped organize the charity 5K run. I know, Mom, but it's different on vacation. We don't want you to feel obligated to keep up with activities that might be too strenuous. And honestly, We could use the bedroom for Eric and Jess. The house is expensive, and we're trying to split costs efficiently. I sat down at the kitchen table, my tea forgotten. You're not upset, are you? It's just that at your stage of life, this kind of active vacation might not be the best fit. My stage of life? As if I were already half buried. As if the woman who had raised her alone after Thomas's first cancer diagnosis when Catherine was 17, who had worked 60-hour weeks while still attending every one of her college ceremonies, was suddenly incapable of walking on a beach. No, of course not, I lied, my voice careful and measured, the same tone I used to use with difficult clients at my agency. I understand completely. Great, I knew you would. Her relief was palpable. Oh, and Mom, we were actually wondering about the beach house. It's pretty expensive for 3 weeks, even split between families. We've had some unexpected expenses lately with the kids' activities and David's car needing repairs. And there it was, the real reason for the call. How much do you need? I asked, my voice flat. Maybe $6,000 just to cover our portion of the rental and some activity fees. We'd pay you back eventually, of course. My hand tightened around the phone. $6,000 so they could exclude me from a family vacation. I thought about Thomas's inheritance, the substantial trust fund he'd left that I managed with careful precision. He'd structured it deliberately after watching Catherine's spending habits in college and observing David's taste for luxury cars during the early years of their marriage. What Catherine didn't know, what she'd never bothered to ask about, was that I had purchased that very Cape Cod beach house as an investment property 3 years ago, shortly after Thomas died. I'd used just a fraction of his life insurance payout, working through a property management company to handle the rentals. I had been waiting for the right moment to surprise the family with this news, perhaps as a future inheritance planning discussion. I'll transfer it today, I said. You're the best, Mom. I've got to run. David's calling from the other room. Love you. The line went dead before I could respond. I set the phone down and looked at Thomas's picture again. In all our years of marriage, he had never once made me feel invisible or burdensome, never once treated me as merely a convenience. I walked to his study, where I still kept our financial documents pristine and organized. The leather chair behind his cherrywood desk still held the impression of his body, a phantom embrace I couldn't bring myself to erase. I opened the safe hidden behind the maritime painting. Thomas had been a sailing enthusiast, and removed the property documents for the beach house. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The rental was managed by Coastal Properties, a reputable firm that handled everything from booking to maintenance. According to their most recent statement, the house had been rented solid through June, but had a cancellation for July, precisely when Catherine had found it available online. The management company had contacted me last week about the new booking request, and I had automatically approved it, not realizing it was my own daughter. A travel brochure slipped from between the pages. A New England coastal cruise, Thomas. And I had been saving for as our retirement splurge. Portland, Bar Harbor, Nantucket, Martha's Vineyard, all the places we'd promised ourselves after decades of putting everyone else first. The trip we never took because Thomas's second, fatal, cancer diagnosis came 3 months before our planned departure. I held the glossy pamphlet, its edges worn from years of hopeful handling. The faces of smiling couples our age gazed back at me, living, exploring, refusing to disappear into the background. What would you do, Thomas? I whispered to the empty room, my finger tracing his signature on the property deed. The answer came with surprising clarity, as if he were standing beside me. Live, Maggie, while you still can. I reached for my laptop and opened the cruise line's website, the decision crystallizing with each keystroke. The Coastal Explorer looked even more magnificent on the computer screen than it had in the brochure Thomas and I had pored over years ago. 8 decks, multiple restaurants, entertainment venues, spa facilities, and balcony suites with sweeping ocean views. The 12-day itinerary read like a dream: Boston, Portland, Bar Harbor, Halifax, St. John, Nantucket, Martha's Vineyard, Newport, New York. I calculated the cost quickly: $5,400 for a premium balcony suite, plus shore excursions and spending. Money. Perhaps $8,000 in total, a significant portion of my personal savings, but just a small fraction of the portfolio Thomas had left, which had grown to nearly $1. $4 million under my careful management. My cursor hovered over the Book Now button. Something held me back. Not doubt about whether I should go, but rather a lifetime of caution. The voice of the practical Margaret, who had always put others first, who clipped coupons even when we didn't need to, who drove her cars until they practically dissolved from rust. Then I opened my email and composed a message to Coastal Properties. Please cancel the July 3/24 reservation for the Harrington Miller party at 145 Shoreline Drive. I've decided to use the property personally during that time. Do not disclose that I am the owner. Simply indicate that the owner has exercised their priority usage rights for those dates. Additionally, please do not offer any alternative properties you manage to this party. My finger hovered over the send button. I took a deep breath and clicked. There was no going back now. I closed the laptop without booking the cruise, but the seed had been planted. The next morning, I woke with unusual energy and purpose. After my daily call to check on my elderly neighbor, Mrs. Fletcher, I decided to visit my closest friend, Jennifer Madison, who had retired from her law practice the same year I sold my real estate agency. Unlike me, Jennifer had embraced her retirement fully and passionately. Jennifer's spacious, contemporary home buzzed with life. Photographs from her travels covered nearly every wall. At the age of 70, she had already visited 5 continents and was planning an African safari the following year. "Margaret!" she exclaimed, wrapping me in a tight hug that smelled of jasmine and the exotic perfumes she collected from around the world. "What a wonderful surprise! Come in. I've just made coffee." I settled into a chair in her sun-drenched living room, which overlooked a small but vibrant garden that couldn't hope to compete with mine, a fact Jennifer frequently pointed out with good humor. "You've been holding out on me," she said, placing a steaming mug in front of me. "William next door told me you were asking about his coastal cruise from last summer." I hadn't realized my casual conversation with my neighbor the previous evening would travel so quickly through our social circle. "I'm just considering options," I said carefully. Jennifer's eyes sparkled. "Options? Margaret Harrington considering options that include pleasure travel? Did hell freeze over?" She laughed to soften her words. "Seriously though, what brought this on? I've been trying to get you to travel with me for 3 years." The whole story came tumbling out. Catherine's call, the exclusion from the family vacation, the request for money, the beach house I secretly owned, the brochure I'd found among Thomas's papers. Jennifer listened without interrupting, her expression growing increasingly indignant. When I finished, she set her coffee down with enough force to slosh liquid over the rim. "Those entitled little..." She caught herself. "No, actually, I'm glad." "Glad?" "Yes, glad. Because this might finally be the push you need to start living for yourself instead of for that ungrateful daughter of yours. Do you know what Thomas told me at your retirement party?" I shook my head, surprised. Thomas and Jennifer had always gotten along well, but I wasn't aware they'd had private conversations. "He said his greatest concern was that you'd spent so much time taking care of everyone else that you never learned how to prioritize yourself. He worried that after he was gone, you'd just keep giving and giving until there was nothing left." My vision blurred with unexpected tears. It sounded exactly like something Thomas would say. Direct, insightful, concerned more with my happiness than his own. "So," Jennifer continued, reaching for her tablet, Which cruise were you looking at? I want details. For the next hour, we explored itineraries, cabin options, and shore excursions. Jennifer's enthusiasm was contagious, and by the time I left, the abstract idea had transformed into something concrete and tangible. Promise me you'll book it, Jennifer called as I headed to my car. Life is happening right now, Margaret, not someday. I drove home with the windows down, feeling the warm, early summer air against my skin. When was the last time I'd done that? When was the last time I'd done anything spontaneously simply because it brought me joy? Back at home, I made a cup of tea and returned to Thomas's study, this time with renewed purpose. I opened his desk drawer and found the small leather journal he'd kept during his final years. I'd never had the heart to read it after his death, preserving it as something private and sacred. Now I carefully opened it, my fingers tracing his familiar handwriting. I paged through until I found an entry dated 3 months before he died. Maggie and I have finally booked our New England cruise for September. I've waited too long for this, put off living too many times in the name of responsibility. I look at her sometimes when she doesn't realize I'm watching, and I see how the years of caring for others have both strengthened and depleted her. She gives so much, expects so little in return. My greatest hope is that this trip will remind her of all the beauty still waiting for her in this world, with or without me beside her. I closed the journal, holding it against my chest. Thomas had known. Somehow he had known that I would need this push, this permission to embrace life after he was gone. The phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. I checked the caller ID. Catherine. Again. I let it go to voicemail, something I had never done before. A few minutes later, the notification chimed. Hey, Mom, it's me. Just wanted to thank you for the money. It really helps us out. Also, could you possibly take the kids the weekend before we leave for the Cape? David and I need to do some shopping and preparation. Let me know. Thanks. I listened to the message twice. No inquiry about my feelings regarding the vacation. No recognition of my exclusion. Just another request. Another assumption that I would be available whenever they needed me. For the first time in my adult life, I deleted the message without calling back. Instead, I returned to the laptop and reopened the cruise website. This time, I didn't hesitate. I selected the premium package with the balcony suite, added the prepaid gratuities and beverage package, and splurged on the shore excursion bundle. The final total came to just under $9,000, a sum that would have horrified me just days ago. Now, it felt like an investment in my remaining years, in the woman I had neglected for too long. I entered my credit card information and clicked Confirm Booking. A surge of adrenaline coursed through me as the confirmation page appeared. I'd done it. After decades of putting everyone else first, I had finally done something solely for myself. The booking system asked if I wanted to send email notifications about my trip to anyone. I hesitated for only a moment before typing in Catherine's email address, then deleting it. No, this wasn't about her. This wasn't about proving anything or making a point. This was about me stepping into a new chapter of my life. That evening, as the sun set over my garden, I sat on the patio with a glass of Pinot Noir, another small luxury I rarely allowed myself. I raised the glass to the darkening sky. To us, Thomas, I whispered. To the journey we planned together that I'll now take for both of us. A soft breeze rustled through the rose bushes, carrying their sweet scent around me like an embrace. For the first time since Thomas's death, the silence didn't feel heavy or oppressive. It felt like possibility. 2 days later, my phone rang during my Pilates class. I normally would have ignored it, but when I saw it was Catherine calling for the third time that morning, I stepped out to answer. Mom, she said without preamble, her voice tight with stress. There's a problem with the beach house. Oh. I kept my tone neutral, my heart beating a little faster. The rental agency called. They said the owner decided to use the property during our dates, and they've canceled our reservation. This is a disaster. We've already paid for activities, and David's family has booked their flights. I could hear the panic in her voice, and for a brief moment, I considered telling her the truth. But something held me back. This wasn't about revenge. It was about respect. "That's terrible," I said, injecting just the right amount of concern into my voice. "Have they offered any alternatives?" "Nothing comparable. Everything decent is booked solid." "Mom, what are we going to do? Could we all stay at your house? I know it's not the beach, but at least we'd have somewhere to go." The irony was almost too much. After being deemed too frail for their vacation, I was suddenly useful again when they needed shelter. "I'm so sorry, honey, but I won't be here. I've booked a cruise. It departs July 1st, and I'll be gone for nearly 2 weeks." The silence on the other end was deafening. "A cruise? By yourself? Mom, is this because of what we said about the Cape Cod trip? Because if you're upset..." "I'm not upset, Catherine." And surprisingly, I realized I wasn't. Not anymore. "This isn't about you or Cape Cod. This is something I've wanted to do for a long time, and I finally decided to do it. But what about us? We have nowhere to go, and we've already spent the money you sent for the rental." I thought quickly. The beach house was out. I needed that time alone, needed to reclaim the space that held so many memories of Thomas and me. But I did have another option. "What about the lake house?" I suggested. Thomas and I had purchased a modest cabin on Lake Winnipesaukee in New Hampshire years ago. We'd rarely used it in recent years, and I'd been considering selling it. It's not the beach, but it has 4 bedrooms, a dock, and a beautiful view. The kids would love the paddleboards and kayaks in the boathouse. There was a pause as Catherine considered this downgrade from her plans. "I guess that could work," she said finally, the disappointment evident in her voice. "But what about the money we already spent on the beach house rental? I'm sure the agency will refund it if the owner canceled on you," I said, knowing full well that Coastal Properties would be processing that refund at my instruction. "If there's any problem, let me know." After we hung up, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Part of me felt guilty for the deception, for not simply telling Catherine I owned the beach house. But a stronger part recognized this as a necessary boundary, a statement that I was no longer content to be sidelined in my own life. The weeks leading up to my departure passed in a whirlwind of preparation. I'd always been organized, a necessary skill for a successful realtor, but planning for this adventure awakened something in me that had been dormant for years: excitement. I visited my doctor for a full physical and necessary travel vaccinations. Dr. Winters, who had been treating me since before Thomas's death, raised her eyebrows when I mentioned the cruise. "A New England adventure? Good for you, Margaret." She smiled as she updated my chart. "Your health is excellent. Blood pressure perfect, cholesterol well controlled. You're in better shape than many patients 20 years younger." I didn't say it aloud, but I wanted to send her medical report to Catherine and David. See? Not decrepit after all. My next stop was a department store, one far from the local mall where I might run into any of Catherine's friends. I'd lost 12 pounds in the years since Thomas died, not from any deliberate effort, but from the simple fact that cooking elaborate meals for one person seemed pointless. My wardrobe consisted primarily of gardening clothes, casual slacks, and the conservative suits I'd worn as a realtor, now hanging 2 sizes too large in my closet. "I need a complete new wardrobe for a coastal cruise," I told the personal shopper, a stylish woman around 45 who introduced herself as Rachel. "I've never done anything like this before." Rachel took in my sensible shoes and cardigan with a professional smile that didn't quite mask her assessment. "Let's start with some resort. Wear basics and then add some special pieces for dinners and excursions." 3 hours later, I left with sundresses in bright colors I'd never have chosen for myself, elegant evening wear for the formal nights, comfortable walking sandals, And even, most shocking to me, a tasteful swimsuit and cover-up that Rachel assured me showed off my still excellent figure. The bill came to just over $2,200, more than I'd spent on clothing in the past 5 years combined. As the saleswoman boxed up my purchases, she said something that stayed with me. "Your family will barely recognize you." She meant it as a compliment, but the truth in it struck deeper. Would Catherine even notice if I changed? When was the last time she had truly seen me? At home, I laid out my new clothing on the bed, running my fingers over the silky fabrics and vibrant patterns. I caught myself smiling at my reflection, something I hadn't done in years. The day before my departure, Jennifer insisted on hosting a small bon voyage gathering with a few close friends. As we sipped champagne on her patio, she raised her glass in a toast. To Margaret, who's finally learning that the best time to live is while you're alive. Everyone laughed, but the simple truth of it resonated deeply. For too long, I'd been living as if my own life were an afterthought, something to be attended to only after everyone else's needs were met. The morning of my departure arrived with a perfect summer dawn. I had arranged for Jennifer to drive me to the cruise terminal in Boston, not wanting to impose on anyone else or pay for long-term parking. As I locked the front door, my hand lingered on the knob. For a moment, anxiety fluttered in my chest. Was I really doing this? Leaving behind everything familiar to venture out alone? What if something happened to me? Who would even notice I was gone? Then I remembered Thomas's journal entry and straightened my shoulders. This was precisely why I needed to go, to remember that I was still alive, still capable, still deserving of experiences that took my breath away. As we approached the cruise terminal, I could see the majestic coastal explorer docked and waiting, its white hull gleaming in the morning sun. "Look at you," Jennifer said, glancing over as she navigated the busy harbor traffic. "I haven't seen you this animated in years." "I feel different," I admitted, like I'm waking up from a long sleep. The cruise terminal bustled with summer travelers, families corralling excited children, couples checking last-minute details on their phones. For once, I didn't feel like an observer on the periphery. I was a traveler too, with my new luggage and carefully selected comfortable yet stylish travel outfit. Jennifer helped me check in, then hugged me tightly before I joined the boarding queue. "Send me outrageous photos," she instructed. "I want to see you doing things Catherine thinks you're too old for." I laughed, promising I would. Stepping onto the ship felt like crossing a threshold into a new life. A staff member greeted me with a flute of champagne and escorted me to my stateroom, a spacious balcony suite that took my breath away. The room featured a queen-sized bed facing floor-to-ceiling sliding glass doors that opened onto a private balcony. The bathroom boasted marble countertops and a spacious shower. A bottle of champagne waited in an ice bucket on the small dining table, accompanied by a handwritten welcome note. I stepped onto the balcony and gripped the railing, looking out. Over Boston Harbor, a breeze carried the scent of saltwater and possibility. For a moment, tears blurred my vision, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming sensation of having finally stepped into the dream Thomas and I had shared for so long. "I made it," I whispered. "We made it." I unpacked methodically, hanging my new clothes in the closet and arranging my toiletries in the bathroom. I placed Thomas's photo on the nightstand. I hadn't been able to leave him behind entirely, and then sat on the edge of the bed, momentarily at a loss. This was it. I was really here. What now? A gentle knock at my door interrupted my thoughts. A steward stood in the hallway with a tablet in hand. "Mrs. Harrington, I'm Daniel, your cabin steward for the duration of your cruise. I wanted to personally welcome you aboard and see if you have any questions before the safety drill at 4 o'clock. "Thank you, Daniel. This is my first cruise, so I'm a bit overwhelmed." His smile was kind. Many passengers feel that way at first. May I suggest exploring the ship a bit before the drill? The horizon deck has a welcome buffet, or if you prefer something quieter, the observatory lounge on Deck 10 offers spectacular views of the harbor. After he left, I changed into one of my new sundresses, a coral shade that complemented my silver hair, which I'd recently stopped coloring at Jennifer's encouragement, and ventured out to explore my home for the next 12 days. The ship was a marvel of engineering and luxury. Multiple restaurants, theaters, a casino, spa, gymnasium, art gallery, and shops lined the central promenades. I found myself frequently stopping to consult the ship's map, determined to learn my way around. In the observatory lounge, I claimed a plush chair by the panoramic windows and ordered a glass of white wine, another small liberty I rarely allowed myself at home. As I sipped, I watched passengers arriving below, many traveling in groups, or pairs. For a brief moment, a pang of loneliness struck me. Was I foolish to do this alone? First-time cruiser? I turned to find an elegant woman about my age standing beside my table, a cosmopolitan in hand. Her silver hair was cut in a stylish bob, and she wore a jumpsuit that I would never have had the confidence to attempt. Is it that obvious? I asked. You have that deer in headlights look we all had on our first cruise. She smiled warmly. I'm Eleanor Bishop, but everyone calls me Ellie. Mind if I join you? I gestured to the empty chair across from me. Please do. I'm Margaret. Harrington. As Ellie settled in, I felt a small knot of tension release. Perhaps I wouldn't be as alone on this journey as I had thought. The ship's horn sounded, a deep, resonant blast announcing our imminent departure. Perfect timing, Ellie said, raising her glass. To new adventures, and leaving the old baggage behind, both literal and figurative. We clinked glasses as the coastal explorer began to ease away from the dock, carrying me into the next chapter of my life. By our third day at sea, I had settled into a routine that felt both luxurious and freeing. Each morning began with sunrise yoga on the upper deck, something I would have dismissed as not for me just weeks ago. Now I found myself greeting the day with outstretched arms, surrounded by fellow passengers of all ages. Ellie and I had quickly cemented our friendship. A retired university dean from Chicago, she was on her 6th cruise as a solo traveler since her own husband's passing 4 years earlier. Best decision I ever made, she told me over dinner our first night. Harold got the golf clubs, I got the freedom. After yoga, I would enjoy breakfast on my private balcony. Fresh fruit, yogurt, and coffee delivered punctually at 8 Pfaume, M by Daniel, who had taken to adding a small flower to my tray each morning. Then I'd consult the ship's daily program to select my activities. The Coastal Explorer offered an overwhelming array of options: lectures on the history and culture of upcoming ports, cooking demonstrations, wine tastings, dance classes, art auctions, pool games. I found myself saying yes to experiences I would have automatically declined at home. That morning, I was getting ready for our first port of call, Portland, Maine, when my phone chimed with a text message. The ship's satellite internet was expensive, but I'd splurged on a minimal package to stay connected in case of emergency. The message was from Catherine. Mom, the lake house is nice, but it's not the same as the beach. Hannah is disappointed. Also, there's no Wi-Fi and the kids are bored. When do you get back again? I stared at the message, my initial instinct, to immediately figure out how to help Waring with my new resolve. Not even a question about my trip. Not a single inquiry about how I was doing or what I was seeing. Just another complaint. I set the phone down without responding and continued preparing for my day in Portland. I'd booked an excursion to a coastal lighthouse, followed by a lobster lunch at a scenic restaurant overlooking Casco Bay. The tour group assembled in the ship's theater, where we were divided into smaller groups and assigned guides. Mine was a knowledgeable local woman named Grace, who spoke with the distinctive Maine accent that made even practical information sound charming. Ellie had opted for a different excursion, a culinary tour of Portland's burgeoning food scene, so I found myself among strangers. "First time in Maine?" asked the man who took the seat beside me on the tour bus, a distinguished-looking gentleman with salt and pepper hair and kind eyes. "First time in decades, actually," I admitted. "My husband and I passed through once, on a road trip, but that was 30 years ago." "Ah, so you're due for a proper introduction. I'm James Caldwell." Margaret Harrington. The bus wound through Portland's charming streets, Grace pointing out landmarks and sharing historical tidbits through her microphone. James proved to be a knowledgeable travel companion, adding his own observations in a low voice meant only for me. He was a retired history professor from Vermont who now spent several months each year traveling. Widowed 6 years earlier, he had initially stayed home, managing memories, as he put it, before his daughter convinced him to join a group tour to England. "That first trip was terrifying," he confided as we explored the grounds of the Portland Headlight, Maine's oldest lighthouse perched dramatically on a rocky cliff. I felt disloyal somehow, enjoying something without Martha. But then I realized she would have hated the thought of me sitting at home, letting life pass me by. His words resonated deeply. Hadn't Thomas expressed similar sentiments in his journal? The lighthouse was everything I'd imagined. Dramatic, historic, quintessentially New England. I found myself taking dozens of photos, not for anyone else, but for myself. To remember this moment, this feeling of discovery. Our group dispersed for lunch at a scenic restaurant overlooking the bay. James hesitated, then asked if I'd like to share a table. Over fresh lobster rolls and crisp local beer, we exchanged life stories. He'd been a professor at Dartmouth, had 2 daughters who lived on the West Coast, and had discovered solo travel as a way to reinvent his life after retirement. "Teaching history is one thing," he said, "but seeing it, touching it, that's another experience entirely." I found myself telling him about Thomas, about Catherine and David, even about being excluded from the Cape Cod vacation. The words flowed easily without the bitter edge they might have carried just days ago. "Ah, yes." James nodded knowingly. "The 'you're too old' conversation. My daughter Alexandra tried that when I mentioned wanting to hike part of the Appalachian Trail. I sent her a video of me at the summit of Mount Katahdin 6 months later." We laughed, and for the first time in years I felt truly seen. Not as someone's mother or grandmother or widow, but as Margaret, a woman with her own stories and ambitions. Back on the ship that evening, I joined Ellie for dinner in the main dining room. We'd been assigned to a table for 6, sharing meals with 2 other couples who had quickly incorporated us into their conversations. Tonight, I found myself eagerly recounting my day's adventures. "You seem different," Ellie observed as we lingered over dessert. "More present." "I feel different," I admitted. After dinner, instead of retiring to my cabin as I had the previous evenings, I suggested we attend the ballroom dancing class being held in the ship's grand atrium. Thomas and I had loved dancing in our younger days, but it had been one of the first activities he'd had to give up after his heart problems began. The instructor, a lithe young woman named Maria, was demonstrating a simple waltz step when James appeared at my elbow. "May I be your partner for this class?" he asked. Dancing with James was unexpectedly comfortable. His hand at the small of my back guided me gently through the steps, his movements confident without being controlling. When the music ended, he kept hold of my hand a moment longer than necessary. "Would you care to join me for a nightcap?" he asked. The stargazing deck should be relatively quiet this time of night. I hesitated, glancing at Ellie, who gave me an encouraging smile and a barely perceptible nod. "I'd like that," I said. The uppermost deck was indeed quiet, with only a few other passengers scattered across its expanse. James led me to a secluded spot near the railing where 2 lounge chairs had been positioned side by side. A staff member appeared almost immediately to take our drink orders. "Scotch, neat," James requested. He looked at me expectantly. In the past, I would have ordered something safe and modest, white wine perhaps, or maybe a sherry. Tonight, I heard myself say, "I'll have the same." The scotch was smoky and complex, burning pleasantly as it went down. Above us, the Atlantic sky revealed stars in patterns I'd never seen from Connecticut. The Milky Way, a bright smear across the blackness. "Did you know," James said quietly, "that light from some of these stars has traveled for thousands of years to reach us? What we're seeing tonight is actually ancient history." I contemplated this as I sipped my drink. So, in a way, we're looking back in time. Precisely. And yet, paradoxically, we're experiencing this moment right now in the present. He turned slightly toward me, his expression thoughtful in the dim light. That's what travel gives us, I think. A connection to both the past and the immediate now. We talked until our glasses were empty, and the night air grew cool, about books we'd loved, places we hoped to see, the strange experience of aging in a world that seemed increasingly designed for the young. It was the kind of conversation that transcends the ordinary, where time seems suspended and words flow with rare authenticity. When James walked me back to my cabin, he paused at my door. "I've enjoyed your company immensely, Margaret. Perhaps tomorrow, if you have no other plans, you might join me for the history lecture. I've been told we'll learn about the maritime heritage of Bar Harbor in preparation for our stop there." "I'd like that," I said, surprised by how much I meant it. Alone in my cabin, I checked my phone again. 3 messages from Catherine, each increasingly irritated about the lake house's shortcomings and demanding to know when I'd be back to help sort things out. I started to type several responses, deleting each one. In the end, I simply wrote, "I'm having a wonderful time. Thank you for asking. The lighthouse in Portland was magnificent. I'll be back when the cruise ends on the 12th. In the meantime, enjoy making memories with the children at the lake. Love, Mom." I pressed send before I could second-guess myself, then turned off my phone and placed it in the cabin safe. Whatever Catherine's response might be, it could wait. Tomorrow held history lectures, new ports to explore, and perhaps more stargazing with an intriguing new friend. As I prepared for bed, I caught sight of my reflection in the mirror. The woman looking back at me stood straighter, her eyes brighter, her smile more ready than it had been in years. Was this what freedom looked like? This lightness? This sense of possibility? I picked up Thomas's photograph from the nightstand. "You would have loved this," I told him softly. "But I think you knew I needed to discover it for myself." When I fell asleep, it was to the gentle rocking of the ship and dreams of lighthouses rising from rocky shores. Dreams not of the past, but of adventures still to come. The morning after sending my text to Catherine, I awoke to the gentle sound of waves against the ship's hull. For a moment, I lay in bed, savoring the peacefulness before reaching for my phone in the cabin safe. I hesitated before turning it on. Did I really want to see Catherine's response while the day stretched before me, full of possibility? I decided to wait. Whatever Catherine had written could remain unread for now. Today was about me. The history lecture with James was scheduled for 10 a.m. in the ship's theater, a state-of-the-art venue with comfortable seating and excellent acoustics. I arrived a few minutes early, wearing one of my new outfits, a flowing linen ensemble, in a shade of blue that matched the ocean outside the windows. James was already there, chatting with the lecturer. When he saw me, his face brightened in a way that sent an unexpected flutter through my chest. "Margaret, I saved us seats in the center section," he said, guiding me forward with a light touch at my elbow. "Professor Wilson was just telling me he's been studying the maritime history of coastal Maine for 40 years. Professor Wilson, a boisterous man with a white beard and twinkling eyes, clapped his hands together to gather everyone's attention. "Today," he announced, We'll be traveling back in time before we reach Bar Harbor tomorrow. You'll learn the secrets of the sea, captains who built fortunes, and the lighthouse keepers who saved countless lives. For the next hour, we were transported to 19th century Maine, with its shipbuilding empires, treacherous waters, and colorful characters. James occasionally leaned close to add a quiet insight or ask me a thoughtful question, his interest in both the subject and my thoughts about it evident. When the lecture ended, he suggested we take coffee on the observation deck. The approach to Bar Harbor is supposed to be spectacular, he said. We should be seeing the first outlines of Mount Desert Island soon. The deck was quiet at this hour, most passengers still at breakfast or attending other activities. We found a small table near the railing, the brisk sea air invigorating after the warm theater. What did you think of Professor Wilson's theories? About the lady lighthouse keeper of Owl's Head? James asked, passing me a cup of coffee from the nearby beverage station. Fascinating, I replied, especially the part about her rescuing those sailors during the blizzard of 1850. I had no idea women were running lighthouses back then. History is full of remarkable women who stepped outside the boundaries society set for them, James T. Sapte said, his eyes meeting mine. Some were celebrated for it, many more were criticized, but they changed the landscape for everyone who came after them. Are you suggesting I'm changing some landscape by taking a cruise? I asked, amused by the comparison. Perhaps not by taking a cruise specifically, he answered thoughtfully, but by reclaiming your right to prioritize your own joy? That's revolutionary in its own quiet way. His observation struck me as both perceptive and kind, acknowledging the small courage it had taken to break from my established patterns. This man had known me less than a day, yet seemed to understand something essential about my journey. We spent the morning talking, the conversation flowing effortlessly from books to travel to our former careers. James had taught American history, with a focus on social movements, retiring 5 years ago to write a book about grassroots activism in New England mill towns. I'm still working on it, he admitted with a self-deprecating smile. The research keeps leading me down fascinating side paths. I've become that stereotypical professor who can't finish his manuscript. Maybe you need a deadline, I suggested, or an editor with a firm hand. Are you offering your services, Margaret? You strike me as someone who knows how to get things done. I laughed. Real estate taught me many things, but academic editing wasn't one of them. You'd be surprised how transferable skills are, he said. The ability to see potential where others don't, to navigate complex negotiations, to understand what people really want rather than what they say they want. Those apply far beyond property sales. As we talked, the coastline of Maine gradually appeared on the horizon, the distinctive silhouette of Mount Desert Island taking shape against the blue sky. James had brought binoculars and offered them to me. Look just to the right of that tallest peak, he instructed, standing close behind me to direct my gaze. You can just make out the lighthouse at Bass Harbor. The sudden proximity sent a ripple of awareness through me. When was the last time I'd been this physically close to a man other than Thomas? When was the last time I'd noticed the pleasant scent of someone's aftershave, or felt the warmth of another person standing near me without it being a grandchild's hug or a friend's quick embrace? I focused the binoculars, conscious of James's presence behind me. The lighthouse came into view, a small white structure perched dramatically on rocky cliffs. I see it, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. It looks so tiny against those massive rocks. And yet it's guided ships safely for over 160 years, James replied. Sometimes the smallest lights make the most difference. We spent the afternoon attending a culinary demonstration where the ship's executive chef taught us to prepare classic New England clam chowder. James proved to be surprisingly skilled in the kitchen. I've had to learn since Martha died, he explained as he expertly minced an onion. It was either that or subsist on frozen dinners. I decided cooking might actually be enjoyable if I approached it as a creative challenge rather than a chore. Thomas never cooked, I admitted. He claimed he couldn't boil water without burning it, though I suspect that was a convenient exaggeration. Oh, it definitely was, James laughed. We men of a certain generation were experts at strategic incompetence when it came to domestic tasks. His candor was refreshing. There was no pretense with James, no carefully constructed image to maintain. Just a genuine person sharing his thoughts and appreciating mine in return. That evening, the ship docked in Bar Harbor. Rather than joining an organized excursion, James suggested we explore on our own. I know a wonderful local restaurant just off the main tourist path, he said. Unless you've made other plans with Ellie. She's attending the ship's lobster bake on the deck, I replied. She insisted I should accept if you extended an invitation. Apparently, she's appointed herself, my cruise fairy godmother. James chuckled. I like her already. Shall we then? Bar Harbor was everything I remembered from that long-ago visit with Thomas. Picturesque, charming, with an unmistakable New England character. The summer evening was perfect, warm with a gentle breeze carrying the scent of salt water and pine. Trees. The restaurant was indeed a hidden gem, tucked away on a quiet side street. A converted captain's house with dark wood paneling, maritime artifacts, and windows overlooking a small garden. James! The host, a tall man with a weathered face, greeted us warmly. Twice in one season? This must be a record. Some places are worth returning to, Michael, James replied, then turned to me. Margaret, this is Michael Barrett. His family has owned this restaurant for 3 generations. Any friend of James is welcome here, Michael said, leading us to what was clearly the best table in the house, a corner spot with views of both the garden and the harbor beyond. The usual, James? Please, and bring us a bottle of that Sancerre we had last time. After Michael departed, I raised an eyebrow. The usual? Last time? You made it sound like you'd been here once, years ago. James had the grace to look slightly abashed. I may have implied that, yes. But in truth, I was here just last month on a different cruise. This restaurant has the best seafood in town, and I wanted you to experience it. You planned this, I said. Not a question, but a realization. I hoped, he corrected gently. Since the moment I saw you on the Portland excursion, is that terribly presumptuous of me? The honesty of his admission touched me. Not presumptuous, I said. Flattering, actually. Dinner was extraordinary, fresh. Scallops harvested that morning, seasonal vegetables from local farms, blueberry cobbler made from wild Maine berries. The wine James selected complemented everything perfectly. Tell me something you've always wanted to do but haven't, James said as we lingered over coffee. I considered the question carefully. Parasailing, I admitted finally. Thomas and I saw people doing it once on a trip to Florida. It looked both terrifying and exhilarating. He wanted to try it, but I was too frightened. I've regretted that. Caution ever since. Well then, James said decisively, we must remedy that. I believe there's parasailing offered at our Nantucket stop. Would you allow me to arrange it? You wouldn't think it's inappropriate? For someone my age? His expression grew serious. Margaret, the only inappropriate thing would be allowing fear or arbitrary social expectations to keep you from experiences you desire. Age is rarely the actual limitation people imagine it to be. Walking back to the ship through Bar Harbor's lamplit streets, James offered me his arm. I took it without hesitation, enjoying the simple human connection. We strolled in, comfortable, silence, taking in the quaint storefronts and historic buildings. Thank you for a lovely evening, I said as we reached the gangway. The pleasure was entirely mine, he replied. Then, with a hint of uncertainty I hadn't seen in him before, "Would you care to join me tomorrow in Halifax? I know a magnificent coastal trail with views that will take your breath away." "I'd like that very much," I said. That night, as I prepared for bed, I finally turned on my phone. As expected, there were several messages from Catherine, each progressively more irritated than the last. "Mom, did you know the lake house doesn't have air conditioning? It's sweltering up here." "Mom, David's parents are complaining nonstop about the change of plans. This is so stressful." "Mom, are you even getting these messages? Why aren't you responding? I need to talk to you about cutting this vacation short." The old me would have immediately called, apologizing, trying to solve everyone's problems. Instead, I composed a brief, pleasant reply. "Sorry for the delayed response. Reception on the ship is spotty. We're in Bar Harbor, Maine tonight. Had a wonderful dinner at a historic restaurant. The lake house has fans in the upstairs closet. Try opening windows on opposite sides for cross-ventilation. Talk soon." I added a photo of the harbor at sunset, deliberately excluding any mention of James or any offer to cut my trip short. After sending it, I silenced the phone and placed it back in the safe. For the first time in decades, someone else's vacation problems weren't going to become my emergency. It felt both strange and liberating. The following days unfolded in a kaleidoscope of new experiences. Halifax with its stunning coastline and maritime history, St. John with its remarkable tidal phenomenon at the Bay of Fundy. James was a thoughtful companion throughout, somehow knowing when to engage and when to give me space for quiet reflection. We fell into an easy rhythm, sharing breakfast on his balcony some mornings, attending lectures or demonstrations together, exploring each port of call with a sense of adventure neither of us might have embraced alone. Ellie watched our developing friendship with obvious approval. "You two are good for each other," she observed one evening as we prepared for the captain's formal dinner. She had come to my cabin to help with a particularly challenging necklace clasp. "I haven't seen James this animated in the 3 cruises we've been on together." "You know him from previous cruises?" I asked, surprised. "Oh, yes. We met on my first solo voyage 2 years ago." He was still very much in his grief then, participating in activities but keeping to himself emotionally. "This is different. You've brought something out in him." "We've only known each other a week," I protested. "At our age, we don't need years to recognize a genuine connection," Ellie replied, giving the necklace a final adjustment. "We've lived enough to know what matters and what doesn't. There. Perfect. That blue gown is stunning on you, by the way. Catherine wouldn't recognize her sensible mother now." The formal dinner that evening was a spectacular affair. The main dining room had been transformed with crystal chandeliers, ice sculptures, and elaborate floral arrangements. The women in their evening gowns and men in tuxedos created an atmosphere of old-world elegance. James was waiting at our assigned table, standing as I approached. The appreciation in his eyes as he took in my appearance sent a warm flush through me. "You look absolutely radiant," he said quietly as he held my chair. The dinner was a 7-course extravaganza with wine pairings for each dish. Our table mates were in high spirits, the conversation lively and punctuated with laughter. Between courses, James leaned toward me. "There's dancing after dinner," he said. "Would you do me the honor?" The grand ballroom had been prepared for the evening, the ship's orchestra playing classics from a bygone era. When James led me onto the floor for a foxtrot, I felt a moment of panic. It had been so long since I'd really danced. "Just follow me," he said softly. "You'll remember." And I did. My body recalled the rhythms, the gentle pressure of a lead, the way to move in harmony with a partner. We danced 3 songs before. Taking a break, my cheeks flushed with exertion and pleasure. As we sipped champagne by the edge of the dance floor, I noticed several people looking our way. A woman approximately my age approached, elegant in a burgundy gown. "I just wanted to say you two dance beautifully together," she said. "How long have you been married?" The question caught me off guard. "Oh, we're not—" "We just met on the ship," James interjected smoothly. "Margaret is teaching me to improve my technique." After the woman moved on, James's eyes met mine, twinkling with amusement. "I hope I didn't embarrass you. People do make assumptions." "It's fine," I assured him, though I felt a strange flutter at the misunderstanding. "I'm just not used to being seen as part of a couple anymore." "Well, you wear it well," he said, offering his hand as the orchestra began a waltz. "Shall we give them something else to talk about? If a 92-year-old could do this, surely I could at 67. James opted to watch from the boat rather than parasail himself. "I'll be your personal photographer," he explained, but his supportive presence helped calm my nerves. As the boat picked up speed and the parachute filled with air, I felt the harness tighten, lifting me off the deck. The sensation of rising into the sky was both terrifying and exhilarating, exactly as I'd imagined all those years ago. Within moments, I was soaring. High above Nantucket Harbor, suspended between sea and sky in peaceful solitude. The view was breathtaking. The entire island spread below me, boats like toys on the water, people on the shore reduced to tiny specks. The fear dissolved into pure joy as I floated in the gentle breeze, experiencing a freedom I'd never known. I could see James on the boat below, camera raised to capture the moment. I stretched out my arms in a gesture of pure exultation, feeling younger and more alive than I had in decades. When I was finally lowered back to the boat, my legs were shaky, but my spirit soared. James helped me remove the harness, his face alight with shared happiness. "How was it?" he asked, though my expression must have been answer enough. "Indescribable," I said. "Like flying and floating all at once. I can't believe I waited so long to experience that." "Some experiences are worth waiting for," he replied. "They find us when we're ready for them." That evening, back on the ship, I sent Hannah a series of photos, the lighthouse from various angles, the beaches we'd explored, and finally the crowning image, me parasailing high above Nantucket Harbor, arms outstretched, face filled with joy. "Your cool grandma living her best life," I captioned it. Her response was immediate and enthusiastic. "OMG, Grandma! Mom needs to see this. You're officially the most awesome grandmother ever. I'm so jealous." I smiled at her reaction, imagining Catherine's face when Hannah showed her the photos. Would she be surprised, concerned, perhaps a little impressed? It didn't really matter. I hadn't done it for Catherine's reaction. I'd done it for myself and for the promise I'd made to Thomas's memory. Later, as James and I shared a quiet dinner in one of the ship's specialty restaurants, he raised his wine glass in a toast. "To the parasailing pioneer," he said with a warm smile. "May today be just the first of many adventures." "I think it will be," I replied, clinking my glass against his. "I've remembered something important today." "What's that?" "That fear is a poor decision maker, and that it's never too late to reclaim joy." Under the table, James's hand found mine, a gentle pressure that conveyed understanding without words. We sat that way for a long moment, connected by touch and shared experience, as the ship sailed onward toward Martha's Vineyard, carrying us into waters I was now eager to explore. Martha's Vineyard welcomed us with sunshine and gentle breezes, the picturesque island embodying everything I'd imagined about quintessential New England coastal charm. James and I strolled through the gingerbread cottages of Oak Bluffs, their Victorian whimsy and candy colors unlike any architecture I'd seen before. "They look like they belong in a fairy tale," I observed as we paused to admire a particularly elaborate example with intricate latticework and a vibrant purple and turquoise color scheme. "They were meant to," James explained. These were built as part of a Methodist summer camp meeting ground in the 1800s. The cottages started as simple tents, then evolved into these fanciful structures. There's actually a fascinating social history here. They represent one of America's first planned communities. His knowledge enhanced everything we saw. What might have been merely pretty became meaningful through his explanations and anecdotes. We wandered through the island's towns, exploring shops filled with local crafts and art, stopping for clam chowder at a dockside restaurant where fishing boats unloaded their daily catch just steps away. In the afternoon, we hired bicycles and rode along a coastal path, the Atlantic sparkling to our right, lush farmland to our left. The exertion felt wonderful, my body responding with energy I hadn't tapped in years. James kept pace beside me, occasionally pointing out wildlife or interesting landmarks. "You're quite the cyclist," he remarked as we paused at an overlook. "I'm impressed." "I'm surprising myself," I admitted, taking a drink from my water bottle. "Thomas and I used to bike regularly when we were younger. I'd forgotten how much I enjoyed it." "That's happening a lot on this trip, isn't it? Rediscovering parts of yourself." I nodded, struck by the accuracy of his observation. "It's like finding pieces I'd set aside and forgotten." "Not lost," he suggested, "just temporarily misplaced." As we cycled back toward town, I found myself thinking about the many aspects of myself I'd allowed to fade into the background over the years. The woman who loved dancing, the adventurer who wanted to parasail, the reader who could lose herself in history and ideas. None of these had actually disappeared. They'd simply been overshadowed by more practical concerns and others' expectations. That evening, we joined Ellie for dinner at the captain's table, an honor extended to a select group of passengers. Captain Alessandro Moretti, a distinguished Italian with silver hair and impeccable manners, greeted each guest personally. When he came to me, he took my hand in both of his. "Mrs. Harrington, I understand this is your first cruise with us. I hope it has met your expectations." "It has exceeded them in every way," I assured him. "Excellent. And is this your husband?" he asked, turning to James. Before I could correct him, James smoothly replied, "Just a fortunate traveling companion. Captain, Mrs. Harrington is kind enough to allow me to escort her this evening." The captain smiled knowingly, as if we were sharing a private joke, and moved on to the next guests. During the lavish 5-course meal, I found myself seated between James and a Texas technology executive who regaled us with stories of his business empire. When he learned I was a retired real estate agent, his interest visibly dimmed, but James immediately engaged him. "Then you must know about the property market trends in coastal New England," James said. "Margaret was just telling me about some fascinating developments in vacation property investments that are being implemented on Nantucket." I had mentioned no such thing, but I played along, discussing market trends I'd observed even after retirement. Soon, the Texan was asking my opinions and offering to connect me with his sister, who had significant real estate holdings in Cape Cod. "Thank you for that," I murmured to James when the Texan turned to speak with his wife. "For what?" James asked innocently. "For making me sound interesting to someone who would otherwise have dismissed me." James's expression grew serious. "Margaret, you don't need me to make you interesting. You simply are. If others can't see that, it's their loss entirely." After dinner, Captain Moretti invited us to join him on the bridge for a special viewing as we passed a particularly scenic stretch of coastline. Standing in the operational center of the ship, looking out at the vast expanse of sea and stars, I felt a profound sense of perspective. My life, my problems, my family drama, my self-doubt seemed small against the backdrop of this ancient seascape. Generations had sailed these waters before me, seeking adventure, commerce, new beginnings. Now I was among them, writing my own chapter in a story much larger than myself. James joined me at the forward windows, standing close enough that our shoulders touched. The evening extended well past midnight, with dancing giving way to quiet conversation at one of the ship's intimate piano bars. I found myself sharing things I rarely discussed: my fears about aging, my frustration with being sidelined by my own family, my uncertainty about what came next in my life. "That's the beauty of this stage of life," James said. "We've discharged our primary responsibilities. Our children are raised. Our careers are behind us. Now we get to ask ourselves, what do I want? Not what's expected or needed, but what brings me joy." "I'm not sure I know anymore," I admitted. "I've spent so long being defined by my roles: realtor, wife, mother, widow." "Then this is the perfect time to find out," he said, raising his glass in a toast. "To discovery." When James walked me to my stateroom, there was a moment of tension, a pause that held question and possibility. But he simply lifted my hand to his lips in an old-fashioned gesture that charmed me more than I cared to admit. "Until tomorrow, Margaret. Sweet dreams." Inside my cabin, I found a towel folded into the shape of a swan on my freshly turned-down bed, a chocolate on my pillow, and a handwritten note from Daniel wishing me a pleasant evening. These small touches of consideration moved me unexpectedly. I stepped onto my balcony in my nightgown, letting the sea breeze cool my flushed cheeks. The night was clear, the moon casting a silver path across the dark water. In the distance, I could see the twinkling lights of a coastal town. We were approaching Nantucket, where James had promised to help me fulfill my parasailing dream. A wave of emotion washed over me. Not nostalgia or regret, but something more complex. Gratitude for this unexpected adventure. Excitement for what tomorrow might bring. And beneath it all, a growing certainty that I was exactly where I needed to be. My phone chimed with a new message. I almost ignored it, but something compelled me to look. It wasn't from Catherine. It was from Hannah, my 15-year-old granddaughter. "Grandma, are you really on a cruise ship? That's so cool. Can you send me pictures?" "Mom says you're in New England. I had to do a report on lighthouses for school last year and got super interested in them." I smiled at the genuine enthusiasm in her message. This was the connection I'd been missing. Someone who saw me as a person having experiences, not just as a resource or obligation. I typed back, "Yes, sweetheart. I'm on the Atlantic Ocean right now. Tomorrow I'll be in Nantucket. I'll take lots of lighthouse pictures just for you." Hannah replied almost instantly. "Nantucket has an amazing lighthouse, the Great Point Light. It's been rebuilt like 3 times because storms kept destroying it. So awesome. Tyler says hi too." Her interest and knowledge surprised me. On impulse, I sent her a photo of the moonlight on the water from my balcony, then added, "I've been learning to dance again. Your grandfather would have loved it." Her response warmed my heart. "No way! I want to see you dance, Grandma. Will you show me when you come back?" "Absolutely," I promised, "and maybe I'll teach you too." This simple exchange with Hannah settled something in me. A reminder that while Catherine and David might see me as obsolete, there were still genuine connections to be nurtured. Still people who valued me for who I was, not what I could provide. I fell asleep that night to the gentle rocking of the ship. My dreams filled with dancing moonlight and the taste of possibility. Nantucket gleamed like a jewel in the morning sun, its charming harbor dotted with sailboats and yachts. James and I disembarked early, eager to explore at our own pace before my afternoon parasailing appointment. "Town first, or beaches?" he asked as we walked down the gangway. "The lighthouse," I replied without hesitation. My granddaughter Hannah is apparently quite knowledgeable about them. I promised her photos of Great Point Light. James consulted his guidebook. "That's at the very northern tip of the island. Quite a journey, but I know just how to get there." He led me to a rental shop near the harbor where, to my surprise, he had reserved a Jeep for the day. "Great Point is only accessible by 4-wheel drive," he explained. "The road runs along a narrow sand spit. We'll have an adventure getting there. The drive along Nantucket's coastline was breathtaking. Historic mansions gave way to pristine beaches and eventually to the wild, remote landscape of the island's northern shore. The sand track was indeed challenging, requiring James's full attention as we navigated between the Atlantic Ocean on one side and Nantucket Sound on the other. "This is extraordinary," I said as we bounced along. I had no idea places like this still existed on the East Coast. "That's the beauty of travel," James replied. "It reveals hidden wonders in places we thought we knew." The lighthouse, when we finally reached it, was everything Hannah had described. A majestic white tower rising dramatically from sandy bluffs, surrounded by nothing but sky and sea. We spent an hour exploring the area, taking photographs from every angle for Hannah. "Your granddaughter will be impressed with your dedication," James observed as I carefully framed a shot of seabirds flying past the lighthouse. "She's always been different from her mother," I said. "More curious, less conventional. I worry sometimes that Catherine doesn't appreciate those qualities in her." "Perhaps you're the one meant to appreciate them," James suggested. "Some connections skip a generation." My own relationship with my granddaughter Emily is similar. We share interests her mother never cared for. On our way back to town, we stopped at a secluded beach for a picnic lunch James had arranged through the ship's concierge. A wicker basket filled with gourmet sandwiches, fresh fruit, and a bottle of chilled wine awaited us, along with a blanket to spread on the sand. "You think of everything," I said, genuinely touched by his thoughtfulness. "Not everything," he admitted. "But I've learned to plan for joy when the opportunity presents itself." After lunch, we returned to the harbor where my parasailing adventure awaited. As we approached the booking office, I felt a flutter of anxiety. "Having second thoughts?" James asked gently. "A few," I admitted, "but I'm doing it anyway." The parasailing staff were young, bronzed, and reassuringly professional. They explained the safety procedures, helped me into a harness, and assured me that people of all ages enjoyed their service. My oldest participant was 92, the young woman checking my equipment told me. She said it was on her bucket list, and she wasn't leaving Nantucket until she crossed it off. That story bolstered my courage. "Penny for your thoughts," he said softly. "I was just thinking about perspective," I replied. "How being here changes how I see everything else." "Travel does that," he agreed. "Shows us both how vast the world is and how connected we all are within it." As we left the bridge, James suggested a nightcap on the stargazing deck. The night was warm, the sky brilliant with stars. We found a secluded spot away from other passengers, and James ordered cognac for both of us. "To new horizons," he toasted, his eyes holding mine. We talked late into the night, our conversation ranging from philosophy to politics to personal dreams. At some point, James's hand found mine, his thumb tracing gentle circles on my palm as we spoke. When he finally walked me back to my stateroom, the air between us felt charged with unspoken possibility. At my door, he paused, his eyes searching my face. "Margaret," he said quietly, "I would very much like to kiss you goodnight. Would that be welcome?" My heart raced in a way it hadn't for decades. "Yes," I whispered. "It would." His kiss was gentle, questioning at first, then deeper as I responded. When we finally broke apart, I felt lightheaded, my senses overwhelmed. "Good night, Margaret," he said, his voice husky. "Dream well." Inside my stateroom, I leaned against the closed door, my fingers touching my lips in wonder. 67 years old, and here I was, feeling like a teenager after a first kiss. Life, it seemed, still had surprises in store. My phone lit up with a notification, a reply to my parasailing photo from Catherine. "Mom, what on earth are you doing? Parasailing at your age? We were worried when you didn't respond to our messages, and now this? And who took this picture?" The message was polite enough, but I detected an undercurrent of disapproval, perhaps even concern that I was behaving in ways that didn't conform to her image of me. Good, I thought. Let her wonder. Let her adjust her perception of who I am and what I'm capable of. I decided to respond the next morning. Tonight belonged to the memory of that kiss, to the woman I was rediscovering, to the possibilities that had suddenly opened before me. I fell asleep that night to the gentle motion of the ship, my dreams filled with starlight and the touch of James's hand in mine. Newport, Rhode Island greeted us the next morning with grandiose mansions lining the cliffs above the harbor, the famous summer cottages of America's Gilded Age robber barons. James had arranged a private tour of the Breakers, the most opulent of the Vanderbilt properties. "Wait until you see the Great Hall," he told me as our car approached the massive Italian Renaissance-style palazzo. "It's completely over the top, but in the most magnificent way." He was right. The 70-room mansion was a monument to excess, with its marble floors, platinum wall panels, and chandeliers the size of small cars. Our guide, a retired history professor who specialized in the Gilded Age, provided context that transformed what could have been merely an exercise in ostentation into a fascinating window into American social history. The women who ran these houses were extraordinary managers, she explained as we toured the massive kitchens and service areas. Alice Vanderbilt oversaw a staff of over 40 people here, managed complex social obligations, and still found time for her own intellectual and artistic pursuits. Not unlike running a small corporation, I observed. Exactly, our guide agreed. Yet their contributions were often minimized because they operated in the domestic sphere. The tour culminated in a visit to the children's floor, where the next generation of Vanderbilts had been raised in surreal luxury. As we looked at their ornate playrooms and miniature furniture, I found myself thinking about Hannah and Tyler, about the legacy I wanted to leave them, not of material wealth, but of courage and self-determination. "You're quiet," James noted. As we walked the cliff path behind the mansion, the Atlantic stretching endlessly before us. "I'm thinking about inheritance," I said. "Not just money or property, but values and examples. What we pass down to the next generations." "A weighty subject for such a beautiful day," he observed. "Any particular conclusions?" "Just that. I want my grandchildren to remember me as someone who lived fully," I said. "Someone who wasn't afraid to change course, even later in life." "Based on what I've seen this past week, I'd say you're creating quite the legacy on that front," James replied, taking my hand as we walked. The gesture felt natural now, as if we'd been doing it for years. That evening was our last night on the ship before docking in New York City the following morning. The cruise line had arranged a farewell gala with dancing under the stars on the upper deck. James and I had arranged to meet after dressing for the occasion. When I entered the elevator to head up to the gala, I caught sight of my reflection in the mirrored wall and barely recognized myself. The woman looking back at me stood taller, her eyes brighter, her silver hair elegantly styled, her navy blue evening gown flattering curves I'd hidden under shapeless clothes for years. More than the external changes, though, there was a confidence in her bearing that had been missing before. James was waiting near the entrance to the deck, handsome in his tuxedo. When he saw me, his face lit up with unmistakable admiration. "You take my breath away," he said simply, offering his arm. The deck had been transformed with thousands of twinkling lights, floral arrangements, and a dance floor set up under the open sky. The ship's orchestra played from a raised platform, their music floating out over the moonlit water. After a champagne, toast from the captain, and a sumptuous buffet dinner, James led me to the dance floor. This time, there was no hesitation in my steps. We moved together as if we'd been dance partners for years, the music flowing through us, the stars overhead, witnessing this unexpected joy. "Margaret," James said during a quiet moment between songs, his arms still around me, I need to ask you something. My heart quickened. Yes? This cruise ends tomorrow, but I'm not ready for our time together to end. Would you consider extending your trip? I have a small house in the Berkshires, nothing grand but peaceful, surrounded by gardens and close to Tanglewood. The summer concert season is just beginning. The invitation was both thrilling and terrifying. To extend this journey, to allow this connection with James to develop further, it represented a step I hadn't anticipated when I boarded the ship in Boston. What about your book? I asked, playing for time to collect my thoughts. He smiled. Oddly enough, I've written more in the past week than in the previous month. You inspire clarity, it seems. I'd need to check my calendar, I said, though we both knew there was nothing pressing on my schedule. Of course, he replied gently. It's just an invitation, Margaret. No pressure. We continued dancing, the question hovering between us. As the orchestra played their final number, a slow, romantic melody that drew us closer together, I made my decision. Yes, I said simply. I'd like to see your gardens. The relief and happiness in his expression told me everything I needed to know. Later, as we stood at the railing watching the distant lights of coastal towns, James's arm around my shoulders, I felt a profound sense of gratitude. For Thomas, who had somehow known I would need permission to prioritize joy. For Jennifer, who had pushed me to take this cruise. For Catherine's dismissal, which had paradoxically freed me to discover new aspects of myself. Penny, for your thoughts again, James said, noticing my pensive expression. I was just thinking about how sometimes the best things come from what initially seems like rejection or loss, I replied. If my daughter hadn't excluded me from that beach house vacation, I wouldn't be here right now. The universe works in mysterious ways, James agreed. When Martha died, I thought my life was essentially over, that I'd just be going through the motions until the end. I never imagined I'd find someone who made me feel alive again. His words echoed my own experience so perfectly that I felt a swell of emotion. I know exactly what you mean. As the ship sailed through the night toward New York, we made plans for the coming days. James would accompany me back to Connecticut, where I would pack some additional clothes and check on my house. Then we would drive to his place in the Berkshires, where summer concerts, garden walks, and quiet evenings awaited. What will you tell Catherine? He asked as we eventually made our way back to my stateroom. I considered the question carefully. The truth, that I've met someone special and I'm extending my vacation. And if she disapproves? Then she disapproves, I said with newfound resolve. I've spent too many years making choices based on others' expectations. It's time I trusted my own judgment. James's goodnight kiss was tender and full of promise. Until tomorrow, he said. In my cabin, I finally turned on my phone to find several messages from Catherine, ranging from irritated to concerned. The latest, sent just an hour earlier, had a noticeably different tone. Mom, I'm sorry if I sounded judgmental about the parasailing. Hannah hasn't stopped talking about how epic her grandmother is. The kids miss you. When you get back, maybe we could all have dinner together. The olive branch was unexpected but welcome. Perhaps seeing me step outside her prescribed boundaries had shifted something in Catherine's perception. Or maybe Hannah's enthusiasm had reminded her that her mother was a person with her own desires and capabilities, not just a convenient resource. I composed a response, careful to be warm but clear about my new plans. Dear Catherine, the cruise has been wonderful, transformative, really. I've made an unexpected connection with someone special, a widower named James. I've decided to extend my trip and spend some time at his home in the Berkshires. I'll be stopping by the house to collect some things, probably Tuesday afternoon. I'd love to see you and the family for dinner when I return, perhaps in August. Give the children my love. I'm so glad Hannah enjoyed the parasailing photo. Wait until she sees what else I've been up to. Love, Mom. I pressed send, then took a deep breath. No apologies, no seeking permission, no defensiveness, just a straightforward statement of my plans and an expression of family love. It felt remarkably freeing. The final morning of the cruise brought us into New York Harbor at dawn, a spectacular entry with the city skyline glowing in the early light and the Statue of Liberty standing sentinel as we passed. James joined me on my balcony, bringing coffee and pastries to share as we watched the approach. "How does it feel to be back in American waters?" he asked, passing me a cup. "Surreal," I admitted. "Part of me can't believe everything that's happened in the past 12 days. It feels like I boarded this ship as one person and I'm disembarking as another." "Not another person," James corrected gently. "Just a more complete version of who you've always been." As we docked and prepared to disembark, I found myself reflecting on the extraordinary journey that had begun with a painful exclusion and led to this unexpected new beginning. The beach house that Catherine didn't know, I owned, would remain my private retreat for now, a symbol of my independence and the boundary I was finally learning to establish. Ellie found us in the ship's lounge as we waited for our disembarkation group to be called. "Well, well," she said, taking in our linked hands and contented expressions. "I see my work here is done." "Your work?" I laughed. "Of course, every cruise needs a fairy godmother figure to nudge the deserving toward happiness." She winked, then grew more serious. "Take care of each other, you two. What you found is precious. Don't let anyone diminish it." We promised we wouldn't. As we finally stepped off the ship, our luggage collected and a rental car waiting to take us to Connecticut, I paused for one last look at the Coastal Explorer. The massive vessel had been my home during this transformation, the setting for a chapter in my life I would never forget. "Ready?" James asked, standing beside me with patient understanding. "Ready," I confirmed, taking his offered hand. My phone chimed with a new message. Catherine had responded to my news with surprising grace. "Wow, Mom. Can't wait to hear more about your adventure and meet this James person. The lake house is actually growing on us. The kids love the kayaks. Take your time and enjoy the Berkshires. We're fine." I smiled, showing James the message. "Progress," I said. "Indeed," he agreed. "Though I suspect your parasailing photo did more to reset her image of you than anything I could say or do." We laughed together, stepping forward into the bright summer day and whatever adventures awaited us next. The summer unfolded like a beautiful novel, each day bringing new discoveries. James's home in the Berkshires was everything he had promised. A charming colonial set on 3 acres of gardens and woodland, with a spacious screened porch where we spent evenings listening to the symphony of crickets and watching fireflies dance among the trees. True to his word, Tanglewood's music filled our days. We spread blankets on the lawn for evening concerts, picnicking under the stars while world-class orchestras played. We explored the Norman Rockwell Museum, hiked gentle woodland trails, discovered farm-to-table restaurants in quaint towns, and spent rainy afternoons reading companionably in his book-lined study. Through it all, our connection deepened. Without the artificial timeline of the cruise-forcing decisions, we were free to let our relationship evolve naturally. Sometimes we spent hours in passionate conversation. Other times, we worked companionably on separate projects, James on his manuscript, me on gardening or planning renovations for the beach house. In mid-July, I finally revealed my secret to James. "There's something I need to tell you," I said one evening as we sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the hills in shades of pink and gold. "That sounds ominous," he replied, setting down his book. "Not ominous, just complicated. You know the beach house Catherine and her family were supposed to stay in? The one where the owner suddenly canceled their reservation?" His eyes widened slightly. "You didn't." "I did," I admitted. "I bought it 3 years ago after Thomas died. It was an investment property, managed through a rental agency. I never told Catherine because, well, I'm not entirely sure why. Perhaps I wanted something that was just mine. Instead of the judgment I half feared, James began to laugh, a deep, appreciative chuckle that soon had me joining in. "Margaret Harrington," he said finally, wiping tears of mirth from his eyes. "You are even more remarkable than I thought. What a perfectly elegant revenge." "It wasn't revenge," I protested, though we both knew there was at least a grain of truth in his assessment. "It was self-preservation." "Of course," he agreed, still smiling. "And what do you plan to do with this self-preserved beach house now?" "I'm not sure," I admitted. "Part of me wants to use it myself for a while. Maybe even tell Catherine the truth." "Would you consider having company there?" he asked, his tone deliberately casual. "Perhaps later this summer?" In that moment, I realized how much our lives had already begun to intertwine. Not in a way that threatened our individuality, but in a mutual enrichment I hadn't experienced in years. We were both secure enough in ourselves to truly appreciate each other's uniqueness. "I'd like that very much," I said. "Though fair warning, I may put you to work painting shutters." "I've always looked good in paint speckles," he assured me. In early August, as planned, I finally returned to the beach house, this time with James. We spent a week making it truly mine, replacing the generic rental furnishings with pieces that reflected my taste, planting a small garden of salt-tolerant herbs and flowers, and repainting those shutters in a cheerful maritime blue. We also explored the surrounding area as tourists rather than residents, taking a whale-watching tour, visiting small art galleries, and dining at restaurants I'd never tried despite technically owning property in the area. One evening, as we walked along the beach at sunset, James suddenly stopped and turned to face me. "Margaret," he said, taking both my hands in his, "these past weeks have been among the happiest of my life." "Mine too," I replied softly. "I'm not proposing, at least not yet," he continued with a small smile. "We're both too wise to rush into anything. But I want you to know that I'm in this for the long haul, whatever form that takes. Whether it's alternating between your homes and mine, traveling together, or eventually creating a shared life, I want to be part of your journey." The simple declaration moved me deeply. There was no pressure, no demands, just an honest expression of commitment to whatever path we might choose together. "I want that too," I said. "For the first time in my life, I'm not planning 10 steps ahead. I'm just grateful for each day and eager to see what comes next." "Speaking of what comes next," James said, his expression turning mischievous. "When are you planning to tell Catherine about the beach house?" I laughed. "Soon. In fact, I've invited them all for dinner tomorrow night." "Brave woman," he observed. "Would you like me to make myself scarce for that conversation?" "Absolutely not," I replied firmly. "You're part of my life now. Besides, I might need a witness when her jaw hits the floor." Catherine's reaction the next evening was everything I could have hoped for. Initially confused by the invitation to dinner at a friend's beach house, her expression when she realized we were at the property she'd been planning to rent was priceless. Wait, how do you have the key to this place?" she asked as I led them through the front door. "Because I own it," I said simply. "Have for 3 years now." The stunned silence that followed was broken by Hannah's delighted laughter. "Grandma, you are officially the coolest person I know," she declared. "Did you cancel their reservation on purpose?" "Leave it to a teenager to cut straight to the heart of the matter." "I did," I admitted, meeting Catherine's wide-eyed stare. "I needed some time here myself. And yes, I was hurt about being excluded from your vacation." To my surprise, Catherine didn't respond with defensiveness. Instead, after a moment of processing, she began to laugh. "Well played, Mom," she said finally. "Well played indeed." That dinner marked a turning point in our relationship. As we enjoyed the meal James and I had prepared, sharing stories of my adventures and listening to the children's enthusiastic tales of their lake house vacation, I sensed a new equilibrium forming. Catherine was seeing me with fresh eyes, not as an aging parent to be managed, but as a woman with agency and her own life to live. When they were leaving, Catherine hung back after David took the children to the car. "Mom," she said hesitantly, "I owe you an apology. Not just for the vacation thing, but for, I don't know, putting you in a box labeled elderly mother without seeing how much more you are." "We all do it," I said gently. "We get comfortable with people in certain roles and stop seeing their full humanity." "Well, I'm trying to see more clearly now," she promised. "And for what it's worth, James seems wonderful." "He is," I agreed. "But the most wonderful thing is that I found a part of myself I thought was gone. That's the real gift of this summer." After they left, James and I sat on the deck, listening to the waves and sharing a bottle of wine under the stars. "Happy?" he asked simply. "Completely," I replied. "Though I'm still planning to make them use the lake house next summer too. The beach house is reserved for us." He laughed, raising his glass in a toast. "To boundaries, beach houses, and brave new beginnings." I clinked my glass against his. "And to the inheritance that truly matters, the courage to live fully at any age." As we sat there together, the ocean stretching endlessly before us, I felt a profound sense of peace. The woman who had been told she was too old for a family vacation had found something far more valuable than a few weeks at the shore. She had reclaimed her power, discovered new joy, and opened herself to possibilities she had believed were long past. The beach house that had been the catalyst for this transformation would now be a symbol of my second act. A life lived on my own terms, rich with connection, adventure, and the wisdom to cherish each moment. I smiled at the thought of the message I'd sent from the ship weeks ago. "Having the time of my life with your inheritance. Wish you were here." The real inheritance, I now understood, had nothing to do with money or property. It was the gift of self-determination, the freedom to define my own path forward. And that was an inheritance worth celebrating, down to the very last precious day. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.